tweet at TalkTV. Here's an interesting thing. Let me be honest with you. I do not eat meat. I'm not vegan. I have one kid who is. I'm not vegan. I just haven't eaten meat since 1982. I probably am what you would call a pescatarian. But I do eat a lot of, I've cut back on vegan products. And this is interesting. Supermarkets are cutting back on vegan offerings by 10%. This is according to research, because experts believe shoppers find meat-free products too pricey and too unhealthy. Farming lobby says that the demand for plant-based alternatives has been overestimated. Now, this week, Beyond Meat, one of the best-known players in the meat alternative business, announced a 30.3% drop in sales and further financial losses for the last quarter. Industry experts believe that companies producing animal-free foods are facing a reckoning because their products are typically more expensive than their meaty counterparts, and because concerns over whether they're actually healthy, because I guess the thinking initially was that vegan products were healthier because we should cut back on eating red meat. Not so, a lot of quarters would say. Now, research published by the grocers suggests that the range of meat-free goods offered up in a typical supermarket shrank by 10% in 6 months. Companies like Tofu, Corn, and Linda McCartney have cut back their product lines. Veganuary this year, this year, less households bought meat-free products during Veganuary. Got a message here as well, because I've got to put this, we're having a very interesting debate there in a moment. A vegan, hi Trisha, I own a vegan cafe and 60 to 70% of my customers are not vegan. I believe the reason some of these companies' profits are going down is not just because of what the farming industry is saying. We'll find out about that in just a moment, as those people who are vegan for varying reasons tend to ignore it. As there is so much research out there, the Beyond Meat burger is one of the most expensive on the market, and you can get just as good as for less. Plus, the market has become a bit saturated. Even vegans shop around for cheaper and better products, especially if money is tight. Alison in Southwark. Brilliant points. Alison has given me a PS here. So please do explain the meaning of the word woke. It gets used in the wrong way too much. Alison, I love you. Yes. For journalists, we've got to be looking at the proper meanings of words, and it's so misused, isn't it? So thank you for that. But let's get back to veganism. Has Britain, is it a fad? And has Britain sort of reached peak veganism? Joining me now to discuss just such a subject is David Bean, who's the Government Relations Manager at the Countryside Alliance, and Ben Newman. Now, if that name, you think, I've heard that name, Ben Newman, before. Animal Rising is the group he's from. He was one of the protesters, one of the many protesters, 31, who ran on to the track in Derby and spared jail after pleading guilty to public nuisance charges. I don't want to go off down that track because that's a whole different story. But they join me now, David Bean and Ben Newman. Welcome. Both of you, can I start this off by saying, hi, the Countryside Alliance, David Bean is a member of, has said the move away from meat-free products, it's becoming clear that businesses have overestimated the demand for plant-based alternatives despite the proportionate amount of noise given to that industry. And milk is one of the other ones. Ben, we've heard from people on the other side. Beyond Meat boss Ethan Brown has blamed interest groups who highlight the ultra-processed nature of these firms' food for the ongoing dip in sales. He told investors this change in perception is not without encouragement from interest groups who succeeded in seeding doubt and fear around the ingredients and process used to create our and other plant-based meat. So let's start with David. What do you think is the truth in all of this?
To be honest, I think your correspondent, Alison, probably had it about right in her message that she sent to you that you read out just before this segment. I'd like to be able to say that I think consumers are starting to see through a lot of the more specious arguments that are being made by vegans, particularly when it comes to environmental aspects, which often...
Like what? Like what? What are some of the things that they put forward that you think are you know, a bit iffy?
Well, it's claimed, for example, that eating meat is inherently worse for the environment than eating plant-based alternatives, and that's simply not true. And you can see this because the way that they calculate the environmental impact of meat production is always based on global emissions figures. They don't take into account the fact that here in the UK, we've got some of the best and most sustainable and also most welfare-friendly meat production in the world. And they also don't take account of the fact that farming systems differ as well between, for example, more and less intensive agriculture. So the claim that it is always better to eat plant-based products than meat is simply not the case. But I'm not sure.
Let me just hold you on that point, because we've got lots of points to cover, and I want to go bit by bit. Don't want to bite off more than we can chew, if I can use that awful pun. So let me put that to you, Ben Newman. Do you think that some of the point that we just heard is true, that you kind of been caught out on this one? Vegans say we should. Why do vegans say we should not be eating as much meat, or we should cease eating meat altogether?
Yeah. Well, it's not just vegans. For example, the government's national food strategy, which came out in 2022. Recommends a 30% meat reduction. It's a pretty uncontroversial point, and the general trend is that meat consumption is going down. I just had a look just before coming on here. It dropped 17% apparently between 2008 and 2019, and pork chop sales have gone down 20% in the last 3 months compared to the previous 3 months. So there's an overall trend. Universities are passing motions to have meat-free plant-based campuses. Councils are doing the same at council events. There is an overall trend. And whether or not Beyond, you know, who cares about Beyond Meat or whatever any of these other companies are? The overall trend is meat consumption is coming down. Yeah. So
is that are you saying is that a good thing? I mean, if more of us went vegetarian, do you think it would be better for who? The planet, animals, who, what?
Yeah, well, I think there's, like, for example, majority of the public are against factory farming. They hate it, and that's how most animals are farmed. Number two, we are in a climate emergency. This is this is happening. And one of two of the big industries, fossil fuels, number one, and number two, which may be even worse when you start thinking about land use, is animal farming. So these two things just need to come down ASAP.
Okay, so let me put that to you, David.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Ben said there. I don't actually have a problem with the idea of meat consumption rates going down. I would actually be quite happy to see people eat less, better meat. And that does mean eating less factory farmed meat and eating more meat that comes from the more sustainable production methods that are exceedingly important to regenerative agriculture, which is when you have farming that actually improves biodiversity. But that's where I don't agree with him is that it's positive to see things like university students associations passing motions imposing meat-free diets on the customers of some of their venues. I don't think that's right. I think it would be far better for them to concentrate on better sourcing of meat and getting meat that is produced to those higher standards.
So what's wrong? So let me come back to you, Ben. What's wrong with that?
Well, they're two. So the sad thing is factory farming is actually is better environmentally, but it's like horrendous for animals. But what people think of as better meat, for example, like grass grazed beef, is absolutely terrible for the planet for the main reason.
So hang on. So you're saying for the planet, you're saying factory farming is kinder to the planet, but not to the animals.
It's less land intensive. So it's so people often equate like grazed animals because they live a better life as being like better for the environment, but that's just not true because they use so much land, and that land is usually deforested. 90% of Amazon deforestation is for either grazing animals or for growing soya to feed to animals. So it's that land use is the big problem, and that's why grazing when it comes to the environment.
Okay, so you're talking about soya, growing soya, just not for the animals. Surely soya, and which is the basis of many a vegan diet, I'd say, probably one of the biggest bases, is causing detriment to the planet.
Yes. So 90% of soya, a lot of 90% here, but 90% of soya is used and fed to animals. So it's only about 6% of soya, sorry to throw numbers at you, 6% of soya is eaten directly by humans. Most of it's for animal feed. So it's a bit of one of the confusing ambiguities, which is often like exploited a bit misleadingly in arguments.
Yeah, because you hear that. Let me come back to you, David. Are you surprised that fewer people are eating vegan products, as I just said, like Beyond Meat being one of them? Are you surprised by that? Do you think that veganism is by and large a bit of a fad?
Well, I would like, first of all, to come back to what Ben said there, because I think it's not quite true to say that land intensivity is really the only thing that determines the impact, the environmental impact of food production on the planet. Once again, he's referring to the Amazon rainforest. Well, I'm talking primarily about UK-based meat production and about the sector that we have in this country. The Amazon rainforest, it won't surprise anyone to know, is not in the UK. And here, actually, the amount of land that it takes to produce food isn't the only factor. Land that is used for livestock grazing can have an exceedingly beneficial effect here in the UK on biodiversity because of reasons like, for example, the fact that you can do rotational farming. You can have one of the years you will grow grass for grazing, another year you might grow cover crops, and it all has a positive effect on soil health. So that's quite an important thing to bear in mind when we're talking about UK-based production. I think the idea that it is more environmentally positive to be doing more intensive farming in the UK simply isn't true, and it's quite misleading to suggest that.
Okay, so Ben's leading, and we've got another message here. Let me just say, universities or local authorities deciding to ban meat on menus is not a personal choice. It's a dictatorial decision taken by people taken hostage by climate terrorists such as Animal Rising. When people have to use their own money, they are now not choosing vegan processed dross in the same way when it's their own money to fund net zero. They also don't choose it, says Chris in Newbury, which is a really good time to come back to you, Ben.
So I'll respond to the first point. So yeah, in the UK, for example, we use about like 15-20% of our land to graze sheep and get 1% of our calories. That's not you'd never design that from scratch. It's ridiculous. And what we could be doing that land is returning it to trees and peat bogs and the rest of it to draw down carbon, restore nature, and have like an actual.
But I didn't realise. Let me jump in there because we just did our rural roundup. And I didn't realise that a lot of the crops that they plant, farmers. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about clearing trees, but a lot of the crops that they plant apparently suck up the carbon dioxide anyway, so they still help. Did you know that? I just found that out today.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how much a crop draws down, but it's going to be a lot less than a forest because then the crops are chopped, they're eaten, they're released. There's only so much this sort of regenerative. This comes under this thing that there can be so much carbon stored in the soil, but you just can't store that much carbon in soil compared to what you can for a peat bog.
All right, so let me ask you, coming back to that message that we both got, let me ask both of you, why do you think there's been a drop in the meatless products in supermarkets? Why are they cutting back? Why are fewer people buying them? Is it just about cost? Is it that lots of these vegan things aren't as healthy as they were initially made out to be? Why?
Well, I can say they're probably not as some of these like Beyond Meat burgers, they're not going to be as healthy as eating a whole fruit and vegetables. That's no secret. And I'd say number two is I think people are buying a lot of home brand brands, not these big expensive Beyond Meat is quite expensive. And number three, people are just cutting back on expensive things in general. So,
all right, we're gonna keep this conversation going right after this break. Welcome back. I'll be taking some of your calls in just a moment. At the moment, we're talking about veganism, the fact that the sales seem to have slumped of certain companies like Beyond Meat. They're not the only one feeling the pinch. It's interesting, though, when it comes to dairy, though, it seems to be a bit of a difference. I think they did this survey, if I've got it here correctly. Oat milk. About a third of people, a third of Brits in a study are now drinking oat milk rather than real milk. So, and the dairy farmers are feeling a pinch. We've had all sorts of conversations about this, like universities having meat-free menus, which one of we got a message just saying it's sort of people dictating to others. What do you think on this? 03444991000. You can text the word talk to 87222 or tweet at TalkTV. With me at the moment are David Bean, Government Relations Manager, Countryside Alliance, and Ben Newman from Animal Rising. So, David, let me come back to you. Dairy farming is feeling the pinch, though, because of this whole vegan thing, and people choose. It's not just vegan. I have to say I can't drink milk, as many people of colour and Asian people, the vast majority of us are lactose intolerant. So hurrah when something comes across maybe soy milk or plant-based milk and what have you. It is affecting the industry. Do you think that the industry... Well, let me just ask you right out. The industry, both industries, veganism and, meat producers and dairy producers, use PR. Is the poor public being caught in the crosshairs of misinformation?
Certainly, there has been misinformation on some parts of the argument, and I was trying to help to correct some of the record a little earlier on. I think, particularly when it comes to dairy. Again, I'm quite happy for there to be a wide and diverse selection of dairy alternatives. As you mentioned, there are many people who, for health reasons, simply will avoid dairy produce. My partner, for example, who is a vegetarian, although not a vegan, tends to prefer dairy alternatives based largely on preference rather than anything else. So, I certainly don't think that people on my side of the argument should be negative about this sort of thing. It's good that there should be more choice available there for consumers. What I would say, though, is that I think that much as I think that we should take this line in saying that we should be all about choice and options, I think that we don't always see that same degree of tolerance from the other side of the argument. They tend to be a little more zealous about it in trying to take steps that would tend towards actively harming the ability for those who choose to consume dairy and meat products to do so.
Oh, Ben.
I just on the crosshairs, Trisha, I think the people who are getting caught in the crosshairs the most are farmers and animal farmers. And the big problem is with some of these big national farming organizations and the government is that the tide is turning. And we need to get off animal farming, but also people are doing it already with milk, as an example. And farmers need to be supported to change. And there's almost no support whatsoever. So I think there is also often this false dichotomy or this false argument between vegans and animal farmers. And that's really not the case. They're just people, they're doing the best job they can, they're feeding the country, and they need to be supported to continue doing that, but in a way which is fit for going forwards into the future.
But so vegans get the joke based maybe on truth is that vegans can be a little bit overzealous in pushing their message. You laugh because you know it. You've heard it before, not just from me.
Well, I think we all know, maybe vegans could some vegans could lose a lack of sense of humor occasionally. I mean, I don't think that's a controversial point, but that's because people do believe about it very passionately, both for animals, which I think all of us care about animals, and this is something a lot of vegans hold tightly, and also for the planet and planet as well. So they're serious issues, and that's why people do take them seriously.
Yeah. Somebody's just said the old joke, how do you know somebody's a vegan? They will tell you. But now let me ask you something while I've got you, and I'm obviously going to come back to David. So would vegans be in favor of this new movement to grow meat cells in laboratories? It'll be interesting hearing from both sides, because if it really takes off, it's surely going to affect farmers as well. But would vegans be okay with that?
Yes, it's kind of that's what it's called. The growing lab meat, but that's not really a financially viable alternative yet. It costs still about 100K a burger.
But would you be okay with it? But but if it's, yes, I mean, like all things, once upon a time, we didn't think mobile phones would ever exist. If somebody's thought about it and manufacturing it, at some stage it will come down in price to make it viable. If and when, let's say it's viable, would vegans be behind lab-grown meat?
Yes, but there is a much more there's something called precision fermentation, which is already being used to make an identical replica of cow's milk, basically, without a cow. And they've sold ice creams in America for it. So yes, these new technologies and alternatives are part of the solution, because we need to reduce animal farming, reduce the number of animals being killed, reduce the amount of land, reduce the CO2 emissions. And however we do that is a good thing. Yeah.
All right, so coming back to you, David. It's a good thing if we reduce the number of animals being killed to put meat on our plates. Would you be in favour of this lab-grown meat?
I think Ben was probably about right in what he said there, to be honest, from my perspective. In principle, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. Again, anything that improves the amount of choice available to consumers is going to be all right by me. It doesn't seem to be a technology that is viable for commercialization at the moment, however, not at scale, largely because of the amount of energy that it takes to produce something and the costs of that.
But here's the thing. Do you think one of the things, Ben, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, touched upon is that farmers aren't being prepared for the way that the market is changing? That you've got these companies with ready meals. Basically, that's what we're talking about, in Beyond Meat and all the other companies. It's not just them. It's sort of ready meals. And like any ultra processed foods, they come up for justified criticism, many people would say, with fewer and fewer people being actually able to cook. But do you think that farmers are just doing what they've pretty much always done? I know there's tweaks and changes with technology and what have you. Or do you think that they need to be ahead of the game? And I think, Ben, you touched on that. Do you think that farmers are being done a disservice by these massive farming companies, or whoever they are, just sort of chugging away, doing what they normally do?
Well, I think what needs to be taken into consideration is the fact that there is a limit to the extent to which farmers really can shift over from producing one type of product to another. And that's because the type of land that they're farming on varies wildly throughout the country. Looking at Scotland, for example, only something like 86% of the land in Scotland is defined as less favourable. So that means that it's only really suitable for either grazing livestock or for producing animal feeds. Looking across to Wales, only 6% of the land in Wales is used for arable crop production. So there's an awful lot of land in the UK that is being used as agricultural land that cannot really be used for anything other than something associated with the production of livestock. So, while our agricultural policy is very often a political football in terms of who should be funded and for what, there is a sort of a natural geographically based limit on what can be done in terms of switching from one end product to another.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And coming back to you, Ben, here's another one. Do you think, and I hear we had a bit of a giggle about the vegans not having a sense of humor and et cetera, et cetera. Do you think, though, that in general, your people who are vegan know about the sorts of things that David has touched upon? It's not just about be nice to cows and grow more vegetables, that there are lots of things like terrain and markets. It's a really complicated subject. Do you feel vegans are driven by save the animals first and all of the practicality second?
I would just say there was a third point he missed. We could grow animals, we could grow crops, or we could return the land to nature, whether or not it would be dependent on that land. So there was this third option, and that's the one which I'd say is what we do with most of the land. So I would, and
so you mean just let it plant trees and what have you on that land rather than one thing or the other?
Yeah, and it would have to be some custom solution. It's like rewilding, which I know some farmers can feel funny about, but it is, but it can work.
But what do we do for food?
And a lot of farmers get transitioned to support to do that. Well,
what do we do for food?
The amount of land we use. So, for example, we use nearly 17% of our land we use for grazing sheep, but in the UK we only get 1% of our calories. So if we stop grazing sheep, for example, it would have almost no impact on our food supply. So that's just an example, and that's kind of sums up the meat industry, really.
Yeah, but
and
what I'm saying is if you do that, if you take those things out, what would you substitute? I mean, you didn't sound overly enthusiastic or deeply upset when I was talking about, for instance, Beyond Meat's profits falling. So the answer, and I know, is to cook from scratch. Now, I've done how many different shows where we look at the cooking skills of the average Brit have just disappeared since most schools don't have it in their curriculum. So with the cost of living crisis, etc., if you say to people, eat less meat, what do they eat instead of meat? Does a time-poor mum with no cooking or virtually no cooking skills, what does she feed her children apart from cake, as Marie Antoinette would have it?
Well, I think people still are. So it's the home brand. People are moving to home brand. There are home brand equivalents of Beyond Meat, for example. So people are buying them. And yeah, when I went vegan, I had to learn how to cook a few things in different ways. It's not going to be exactly the same, but I actually eat nicer food now than I did before, so it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, but you're probably... are you single?
Well, I am at the moment, actually, but the...
But what I'm saying is if you've got loads of kids, people often say, and I'm just reading some of the things they say, I don't have time to be doing all of that. My kids won't eat anything other than that, etc., etc. That's often the argument that you get, that, it's tough.
Yeah, it is. It is hard. I don't think anyone's going to be holding a single. I certainly wouldn't be a single mum. They've got to make choices for their family. But the overall trend is, that there are details around how we manage the farms, how we manage our homes, how different parts of society deal with the transition, and we need to be kind and considerate and forgiving to people. But the bottom line is we have to reduce it.
Okay, thank you so much. Final word to you, David.
Work a lot. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I was just going to say, I think that Ben has been a little bit too down on sheep, throughout this this discussion. They're not only there to produce meat. There are an awful lot of other products that you get from sheep. If you do away with sheep farming, then you do away with wool, which is probably the most sustainable fiber we've got. And you also do away with the industries, often craft industries, such as tweed, which is particularly prevalent up in Scotland, that have been using this product for centuries. They would go overnight if the sheep went. So I think we do need to take a slightly broader view as to the overall impacts of farming, not just on the environment, but also on the broader economy. Yeah,
so you don't think about that. You don't think about that. Let me just pick up that point. I'm just thinking about shoes. And then coming back, let's come back to you, Ben, because we've just got another call, I think, coming in. But Ben, let me come back to you with shoes. And now there's all the issues about microplastics and things like that. The joke going, we've all got a little bit of Barbie in us, microplastics. So, it's Do you think we have enough good substitutes for things like leather and wool that won't cause additional damage to humans? So, Ben?
I think there are some alternatives. Yeah, I think there are some like I was reading about pineapple leather the other day. There are alternatives being developed and mycelium mushrooms. So yeah, and but we have to invest in these things. And it's not to say there's like for like copies of everything, but these are sorts of things we need to be investing in and trying out. You know, there are going to be some adjustments as we. I mean, that's life, that's society, that's the world. We're going to move and we're going to change and we're going to adjust and we're going to find replacements, different ways to do.
Okay, well, look, we were talking to James Fairley earlier, Farming Funny podcast. He's been listening in and he desperately wants to speak. James, welcome back. What did you want to say?
I like to clear up the whole misinformation about land use.
You think there's misinformation about land use?
Yeah, specifically about the calorie, the calories we receive off of the land, the 20% of land in the UK. I would like to know what else we can do with that land.
So Ben, what else could farmers like James do with that land?
Yeah, the overall pattern is that it needs to be returned in some way to some more natural habitat of trees, peat bogs, and other carbon sinks. In terms of dealing with the climate problem, and also bringing back the nature and wildlife to the UK. But yeah, on a case by case, the people who know the land best, I'd say yes, certainly are animal farmers, and it would be great to hear if there are what are the alternatives, because
there you go,
what
James.
we're doing now isn't working.
Okay, so James, are there alternatives? Could you just let your land go back to its natural state?
Well, we've not just been farming for the last 10 years. This has been a beyond generational thing that we've been doing. It's the first industry that was created in the world. And do you not think by now we would have come up, if there was a better way to make money, considering livestock farmers do struggle from time to time, well, not time to time, year to year. Do you not think that if we knew there was better ways of making money off that land, we wouldn't be doing it? I mean, we've got to ask ourselves a question. If we're not producing industry and driving businesses off of the land, is the taxpayer going to foot the bill for looking after all that land?
So Ben, I guess, so coming back to you, Ben, there are the practicalities of people have to make a living, and where does the money come from?
Well, currently where the money comes from is government subsidies. Sheep farming is not, they're kind of being taken away. Since we left the EU, there was a common agricultural policy, and sheep farmers got lots of money from it. And I think that's still continuing in many forms. But it is already subsidized by the taxpayer.
So who would look after
but
this
what the government needs to do?
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
And the government needs to the scale of this problem obviously requires government support and intervention. It's not the responsibility of one individual sheep farmer to carry the weight of all this agro and climate change on their shoulders. They need support and rewilding the land and other nature projects. Individual farmers can speak for themselves, but that is a skill set which a lot of farmers are involved in, and they have done this in the Netherlands. So, but I don't want to tell individual farmers what they should be doing. But in terms of the national government policy level, this seems like something they need to be doing, supporting farmers to get.
James, thank you for calling in again. I just say to you, Ben, good luck with this government. I mean, Rishi Sunak's talking about mining again and what have you. So, I mean, I wouldn't be holding my breath, and Labour hasn't come out strongly in either way. So, I guess you guys are going to be campaigning more and more. David, I think James kind of wrapped it up, didn't he, there?
Well, I think he did from his perspective, certainly. Just to pick up on his argument in regards to rewilding, this idea that what we should be doing with a lot of the land that is only really suitable for livestock is by returning it to a wild state. I think the first thing that needs to be considered is that farming has, as James said, shaped the landscape for generation upon generation. So it's very difficult to know what exactly you would be returning it to. Certainly not something within any living memory. But what I'd like to say is that actually through regenerative farming practices, you can serve both objectives. You can use land both for food production via livestock, while also providing benefits, not only in terms of acting as a carbon sink, but also in promoting biodiversity more broadly, introducing more species, having a greater range of species thriving on that land, while also using it for food production. You can have that win-win, and I think that's what we and what the government ought to be promoting.
So now, just to wrap this up, for both of you, David and Ben, what strikes me during this conversation, and James, again, thank you for calling in. What strikes me in this conversation is that the first thing that I come up with, why don't groups like Animal Rising sit down and have, I'd love to see a conference between Animal Rising and the Countryside Alliance, because sometimes it seems that people just haven't, they've taken a position and assumed the other side thinks the opposite without actually sitting down and exploring something. I mean, does that sound like a good idea? It sounds like an obvious one to me.
Well, I mean, the Countryside Alliance Foundation, the charitable organization that we support, supported a conference several months ago, an event which brought together people from right across the rural sectors to discuss the future of the countryside in that broad level. Now, it's fair to say that Animal Rising was not an organization that we considered to have very much positive to contribute to that. But certainly on the broader level, looking across the rural sector, there are those discussions being had.
Okay, well, maybe next time Animal Rising needs to be on the list so you can continue this conversation. Let me thank both of you for your time today. David Bean, who is Government Relations Manager of Countryside Alliance, and Ben Newman from Animal Rising. It is an